Great, so I want to welcome everyone to the October 19th, 2023. I need to make sure that everybody mutes their.
It was me, I'm sorry. Oh, but it's not letting me.
It still appears to be yours.
It wouldn't be a meeting without something.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Goes out of our system.
I know, yes, I thought we did. And welcome everyone to the October 19th, 2023 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are recorded on WebEx for posting on our website along with the presentation that we'll receive today. Our one item today is a meeting from 10 until 11:30, looking at how the designs for Bell Street between Elliott and First Avenue have progressed since our last meeting that was in February this year. Anyway. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and do a round of introductions, starting with commissioners and then the design team and members of the audience. The format for our meeting will be, we'll have a presentation of around 30 minutes, followed by questions from commissioners. And then afterwards, after questions from commissioners and any member of the public that we see online or in the room, and we have an opportunity for 2 minutes of questions. After which commissioners will deliberate, and I believe we'll be taking an action today. And yeah, that's it. We'll go ahead and start with commissioner introductions, and commissioners will start with Ben Giston. Can you also remind people what your role is on the project?
Ben Gist, architect commissioner.
Hi, I'm Matt Elfs, also architect commissioner.
Hi, I'm Molly Spitalnik. I'm the Urban Design Commissioner, and I will be taking action today.
Elizabeth Connor, I'm the Artist Commissioner. Good morning. And I'm filling in for Chair and Vice Chair as Chair today.
I'm Pooja Shiva. I'm the Engineer Commissioner.
Phoebe Bogert, Landscape Architect Commissioner. Jay Backman, they, them, theirs pronouns, and I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner.
I'm Andrew Barish. I'm with the Waterfront Consulting Team. I'm the project manager for the Bell Street project.
I'm Hannah Bondrock. I'm with GGN, Landscape Architect and Urban Design.
I am Joey Aiken. I'm with the Office of the Waterfront Civic Projects, and I am the project manager for the Bell Street project.
Welcome. And we have 2 members in the audience.
Good morning. I'm for the Urbanist.
I'm Brenna, and I'm
Thank you. And we also have online 2 staff members, Juliet Acevedo and Wendy Vandekar. We don't think we have any other commissioners just attending online today. So with that, I'll throw it your way, and I think we have about a half an hour. Correct? Great. Thank you. And you should be able to share your screen.
So we already did introductions, so we can probably just skip to the second slide. So this is a boundary showing the Seattle Waterfront Program. So like I said, I'm with the Office of the Waterfront and Civic Projects, and we're tasked with reconstructing and reconnecting the Seattle waterfront to downtown, now that the viaduct has been taken down. So the Waterfront Program has numerous projects, 10 plus projects within the program. Main one being Main Corridor, which rebuilds the roadway through the waterfront and the Park Promenade, Pier 58 rebuild, Union Ped Bridge, and so on. What's a little less known is that at the very north end of the program, which is the highlighted section there on the right, is the Bell Street Improvements Project, which is part of the program. And the Bell Street Improvement Project is really about making that final connection from the waterfront program to the Belltown community and Northtown. So that's what we're here to chat about today. So the next couple slides are just going to be highlighting briefly what you saw previously, which was 10% design, right about 10% design. And then the next slide will be 60% design, just highlighting. Hannah and Andrew will go into the meat of the details. We can flip back to you want to flip back to 10% real quick? So 10%, what we saw is the two-way PBL is on the south side of the road. There's the Alaskan Way sign bridge at just west of Western on Bell Street. There's the seating that is piles, and there's parallel parking on the north side of Block 2. And when I say Block 2, just to kind of define it, it gets a little confusing talking about the directionality of this, where it's the west side, south side of Bell, west of Western. So we call Elliott Ave to Western Block 1, and then Western Ave to First Ave is Block 2. So if you just hear that reference, that's what we're talking about. So we've got parallel parking here on the north side of Block 2, and Bell Street is a one-way single lane road.
So I have to, I'm sorry to do this, but at
Yeah.
10:19, there's going to be the Great Shakeout.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So the tradition is we go on big tables.
Okay.
I'm not to participate in tradition. I think you're all comfortable with it, but literally at 10:19, there's going to be stuff broadcast. So
Right.
It's not a reaction to your presentation.
no,
Yeah, Valerie already pointed it out, so I was like, oh, that's right.
it lasted for 2 minutes. Sorry to interrupt your flow, but I thought I better do this now instead of when the.
We prepped the whole deal. I forgot to run around screaming.
Oh. Sorry.
I'll be running around screaming. If we want to go to the next current. So this is what we're going to be presenting on. Like I said, Andrew and Hannah will be going through the details, but just wanted to highlight the main things that have changed. You can see that the two-way PBL is now on the north side of Bell Street. The seating has changed from piles to boulders. The planting areas, previously we had numerous smaller zones, and now we've got a larger, more concentrated space. The sign bridge is still at Western on Block 2. And those are the main highlights of what you will see. Then we can go to the next slide even. So this is generally shows the project boundaries, right? From Elliott Ave to First Ave on Bell Street. And this is pre-2019, so when the Alaskan Viaduct was still there. And you can see that the viaduct really dissects the street. And if anyone remembers or knows that area at the time, it wasn't the most friendly walking environment, wasn't the greatest place to be. And so now what we have is Bell Street today. This aerial is a little bit dated, but what this really highlights is without the viaduct, obviously, the potential there to create a connection and create the gateway from the waterfront to Belltown is enormous. And so that's what we're hoping to take advantage of and be able to install a great gateway for the community. So this slide shows current photos. I believe Hannah took these just a couple weeks ago even. But this shows what the really good thing about Bell Street, in my opinion, one of the really good things is just how many mature street trees are out there. And as well as pedestrian lighting. There's a good amount of pedestrian lighting on this corridor, and we're intending to keep all of it. It also shows, this photo shows the improvements that were just recently done by Main Corridor with having a one-way east and westbound. They go towards Western, which you'll see on a following slide. In this slide, in fact. So the vehicles here travel one way to Western. So Block 1, the vehicles are going eastbound, and Block 2, the vehicles are going westbound, and then everything is going northbound on Western. The cross sections that you can see below show that the travel lanes are pretty wide, and there's parallel parking on both sides of the road. And I'll pass it over to Hannah to really talk through the nitty-gritties of what we're how we developed and what we're going for.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. I just wanted to bring back a couple of historic slides to show the story of the site and some of the historic aspects that we've been inspired by and that we trying to express through materiality and some different aspects of the design. So just a couple quick images here to refresh everybody's mind of what may have been shared in the last SDC presentation. So our site, the 2 blocks of Bell Street, where it is today, is very close to what used to be the historic Belltown Ravine. And so you can see what used to be the waterfront condition. You know, Belltown was up on this bluff, and this bluff dropped off down to the waterfront. And so what's interesting about the historic Belltown Ravine is that it was one of only a couple ravines that cut through that that bluff that separated Belltown up high down to the water. So given that it was so close to where the current site is in Bell Street, it's something that has really intrigued us and given us inspiration in terms of material expression and the stories that we can tell. And you all know, as Joey pointed out, pre-2019, the Alaskan Way Viaduct going along the waterfront and then touching down right, bisecting the 2 blocks of our project was a significant part of the story. And we, as you likely recall from the last presentation, we are salvaging this Alaskan Way Viaduct sign bridge that you see in this photo, and we'll be refurbishing or restoring it to its, you know, what it once was in terms of paint color and finish, but trying to have a really light touch and keep it pretty much as is, but using this as a big gateway element that can be a gateway into Belltown. And just a quick refresher on a couple schemes that we had shared in the last SDC presentation. The bottom scheme is what we kind of push forward with. All of the components are essentially the same as what we've shared in these options. The only exception is that, you know, the bike lane was on the south side in these previous schemes, and it is now moved to the north. But generally, the components are all very similar to the current design. We've got seating and interactive elements that can act as seating if desired along the south side, stitching the 2 blocks together. They kind of happen incrementally here and there for people to be able to pause and catch their breath and you know, have something that visually ties the 2 blocks together and creates continuity. Concentrating most of those elements around Western and Bell at that intersection of that new Elliott Gateway, where we also have the sign bridge. And the feedback that we heard from you all last time was in regards to seating, the desire for it to be playful and you know, in areas that have good solar access, requests for design relationships to both the waterfront and the neighborhood context, making sure to focus on pedestrians and cyclists, seating and focus, keeping that on the district center. So again, like I just mentioned, along the New Elliott Gateway, where Western/New Elliott crosses Bell Street, so that central intersection, and also focusing more on greenery. So we'll go into more details on how we evaluated those things and how things are shaping up. This plan that you see on this slide is essentially this is essentially the 10% concept plan that we submitted for 10%, and what we shared with the Belltown Community Council in June. And we just wanted to share some of the feedback that we received from the community on that plan. So overall, residents and businesses wanted to see lighting on the sign bridge. So that's something we've been developing. They had a preference for the 2-way protected bike lane, which is remaining and we're proceeding with. They wanted a seamless connection between Bell Street improvements and the Bell Street Park, which is the next block east of us that we're connecting into on Bell Street. An interest in seating between Western Avenue and First to serve as resting points as you go up that steep incline of Bell Street. And key takeaways from the previous briefings, just to give you kind of a holistic picture of the feedback we received. There were suggestions for visual cues to the space that would draw people from the neighborhood or into the neighborhood from like Pier 66 and the waterfront area. residents wanted Bell Street to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists, improve cycling and pedestrian infrastructure to connect into Belltown directly, and residents and business owners also wanted to improve wayfinding and signage to guide visitors from waterfront up into the retail core of Belltown. And so between the historic images that I shared, the SDC feedback that we received last time, the input that we've received from community outreach, from here, we're kind of gathering all of that and taking that all into consideration as we've developed the design. And we've where we've gone from there is looking closer at some of the traffic flow and really getting real about what exists on site, what the existing conditions are and the constraints that we're working with in terms of adding planting, where we can place things, where are utilities, all of those logistical things. So from here, I believe Andrew will speak a bit about some of the traffic flow analysis.
Thanks. So I wanted to start by zooming out a little bit because as was mentioned, the Bell Street project has two one-way streets that point at each other, and then at Western Avenue goes northbound. And this is partly in response to kind of the overall network and how the streets are laid out north of what has been our waterfront improvements. Now, south of Bell Street is the intersection of Blanchard and Elliott Way. And Elliott Way, as it heads down to the waterfront, is a two-way street. But at this point, it starts to split, and that's because of it needs to receive.
I knew it was. I'm doing it mentally. I'm mentally.
We'll do it for
Valerie's doing it, I'm doing it. Right here with you.
You know, we normally take pictures.
just a demo here.
Michael, were you meant to?
You what?
No.
I'll shoot you.
They're not gonna let us out.
Did they tell us when we have to get out of here?
No. It's self-selecting.
This is the fun part.
I'll be taking the action.
It's why I feel safe.
It just approved itself.
I think it was 10 seconds. If you guys-
Thank you for your cooperation.
All right. Well done.
So nostalgic with Bound Girls.
All right, I can continue. I should also draw attention to the legend here. So we've got blue is representing vehicle paths, the green is representing bike paths, and the purple arrows are just directionality. So again, as mentioned, the Elliott Way is a two-way street that connects to the waterfront, but as we head north, it needs to tie into existing one-way streets at Western Avenue northbound and Elliott Avenue southbound. So it splits. And so we end up having these one-way streets north of Bell Street. And Bell Street itself points towards Western Avenue, but if you look at Battery Street, it's actually the inverse of Bell Street. And what you end up having is these kind of circulation blocks, these cells that allow for one-way circulation around and to access all the faces of the block for both the block west of Western Avenue and east of Western Avenue. So while in isolation, it does seem a bit odd, or it makes sense, I think, if you look outward and see how it fits as part of the overall system, especially whenever projects tie into existing infrastructure, you need to make accommodations to make sure everything is flowing together. So hopefully that's clear. I know that's been a confusing question, or people have been asked that question a lot, so hopefully that's helpful. So this is a bit technical, so I apologize for that. But what we have is the western block, or block 1, on the top, and the eastern block down below. And this zooms in a little bit at some of the detail of the protected bike lane, because some of the questions that came up were, how does this tie into some of the existing bike infrastructure that's in place or planned? And so there is an existing southbound bike lane on Elliott Avenue. Now, because that's on the east side of the street, it's a nice, safe connection into our eastbound lane of the two-way protected bike lane. And as we approach First Avenue, we will be crossing First Avenue, and what's not shown here is planned improvements to add a protected bike lane on Bell Street between First and Second Avenue to connect into the Second Avenue bike lane, protected bike lane. First Avenue has shared lanes right there, so those also are accessible. But Second Avenue is more of a main conduit for cyclists, as well as Western and Elliott. So hopefully that makes sense. I could pause if anyone has questions about kind of the traffic circulation or bike connectivity, because that's what those slides are trying to convey. We can come back to that later too.
Yeah, so summation of all of those things is the current plan of where we're at now, which is up on screen. The protected bike lane is on the north side. We still have that that planted buffer, hence protected bike lane. The planting that you see here, Joey touched on it briefly. Previously, we had proposed, or the plans that we had shared suggested planting essentially at every existing tree pit that is out there, expanding the tree pits out and adding planting to every one of those and maximizing that as much as possible. That's changed a bit as we've looked at the existing conditions and the realities of utilities, the condition of the trees, and our ability to expand around them. And so we've taken a closer look, and it's been more of a reconcentration and put most of our planting focus on the south side of Bell between Elliott and Western, so on block 1. That's where we can get the most amount of planting and the most massing that we think is going to survive and do well and give us the most, I guess, bang for our buck in terms of planting. So you'll notice since the protected bike lane shifted to the north, that has allowed us to widen the pedestrian zone and widen that by getting rid of the parallel parking between Elliott and Western on block 1. So that's part of what helped us get more planting there. The seating elements are, as Joey mentioned, we're proposing boulders, and I'll kind of speak a little bit about that, and what's inspired that. The historic sign bridge from Osmond Viaduct is in the same location, concentrated at Western and Bell to create that gateway, with the majority of the boulder seating elements on that intersection. The darker paving that you see at the intersections and at Western and Bell is something that we're pulling from the existing Bell Street Park just to the east. There's special paving on that block that we're trying to pull across just to create that continuity along the entire Bell Street corridor. And then the remaining sidewalk improvements are standard concrete. Zooming in a little bit just to show a little more detail of what I spoke about in terms of expanding the planting around the existing trees. So block 1 on the south side, we have the ability to get a good amount of planting, but the remaining areas, the north side of block 1 and then both north and south side of block 2, are really constrained in being able to expand those planters out and add planting that's substantial that we feel is going to ultimately survive long-term and be robust. So you'll see a couple sketches here. The existing condition if you're on block 2, where we can actually widen, get rid of the parallel parking and expand the pedestrian zone to introduce planting, it's going to look something like this. So we'll have about a 7-foot or so sidewalk with new paving, standard concrete. At the existing tree pits, we are expanding them as much as possible to improve the health of those tree roots, but not necessarily trying to squeeze in plants between those tight roots. So trying to give those trees the best chance possible. And then introducing some sort of special pavement that is, I say some sort, but I'll get more detailed here later in the slides, but unique paving that adds a bit of textural quality, but serves as a place that people can stand off to the side, potentially introduce, the seating elements, and then have plant protection rail that, again, pulls from the existing materials of the Bell Street Park. We're looking at using the same plant protection rail that's used there to create that continuity along the corridor. And looking at block 2, this is just an example of what I'm talking about in terms of our limitations for getting planting around these trees. Here's an example. If we expand those tree pits as much as possible, we kind of end up robust enough long-term to make it make sense. We want to do something that's going to withstand the really tough urban conditions that we're dealing with. So we're recommending doing a nice hardscape treatment that is kind of like the planted version of paving. It's a textural, provides interest, but it's something that's going to look good over time. It's not going to turn into just a dirt patch from foot traffic and all of the tough things that happen on the Seattle sidewalks. And along with the material treatment of that, we see it as an opportunity to tie in the seating elements to kind of be of that same language. And so the idea there is, it's pulling from that Belltown ravine idea. We were inspired by the natural processes that you can imagine that happening in that ravine. There's rocks and boulders and logs and things washing down that ravine down towards the water. So that was kind of an inspiration for us in terms of the materiality. So that's where the idea of the boulders and this sort of rock wash idea came from for that special paving zone. So again, seating, the boulders are mostly concentrated at the main intersection of Western and Bell, but sprinkled throughout the entire 2 blocks for continuity. Some details that we've developed and are finalizing now are just how the top surface of those are treated. A select few will be treated in this way, but a good majority of them will just be natural. So trying to be strategic about where we want the focus to be in terms of what's actually sittable. And then hardscape, again, like I mentioned, tying in the concrete paving with that the special diagonal pattern that's existing on the Bell Street Park to the east. So pulling that down into these 2 blocks, and then the special paving with the cobblestone idea for that, expressing the rock wash concept is everywhere shown in red here. Just a couple details showing how that would shape up when you see a boulder intersecting with that special paving, how that is starting to look. And then taking a little bit closer look at where exactly we're putting these elements at the key intersection. There's some really nice views, and it felt like Western and Bell was the most logical place and the most comfortable place to have a pause moment. It's got nice views up to the Space Needle, some views down towards Rainier and the stadiums, and so it felt like a good place to cluster some seating elements to give folks the options of different orientation directions, and again, all concentrated around the sign bridge as this key gateway moment. And talking more about sign bridge, as I mentioned, the plan is to keep the sign bridge as have a pretty light touch on the improvements that are happening. It's really just taking it as is, restoring it to what it was with the existing paint color, and just making sure that it's, you know, it's got the right coatings and things that it needs for anti-graffiti, things like that. But really trying to have a light touch to keep it as is. The structure of it, we think, is a pretty unique and interesting thing. So when it comes to lighting it, it's something that the community has really felt strongly about, that we should light this thing and make it a feature, a welcome feature for the community. So we've been working through some lighting concepts. So the idea is to kind of light it internally, so you never see the light source, but it's something that's illuminating that structure, kind of highlighting the interesting bracing and whatnot, trying to get some sort of glow coming out of those circles, kind of Art Deco style circles of the structure. Jumping over to planting, there are, as Joy mentioned, the character of the street as it is today is really lovely with the existing trees. The canopy is really nice, something that we absolutely want to maintain as much as possible. So we're doing our best to keep every existing tree on site, and then we are proposing 4 new ones where we have gaps where there's not currently trees already. So there's 3 up on block 2, close to First, and then 1 over by Elliott. We'll be using a species. We've been working with urban forestry to work through what species they feel comfortable with. So we'll be going with the Green Mountain Ixorsaccharum sugar maple. And when it comes to plant massing in that widened pedestrian zone where we have our robust planting, we're looking at doing 3 kind of core shrubs that establish like the structure and the kind of the backbone of the plant massing. And then everything else is more accent planting. And if anybody wants to go into details on plant species, we can, but I'll leave it at that for now. Strategies for pet relief, like I mentioned, we are using plant protection rails to tie into that existing Bell Street material palette, and just protecting the planting as much as possible, and potentially using some of the boulder elements, like very selective, you know, not the seeding boulders, but smaller ones potentially, you know, paired with them, placed very strategically to try to concentrate pet relief to certain areas. So yeah, at this point, we're really just finalizing, sharpening our pencils on all of those details. The sign bridge lighting details, the boulder seating, cobblestone paving, the plant protection rails. Just, yeah, working through the nitty gritty details of it. And the next step is we'll be entering the 90% phase, and Belltown Community Council will be sharing with them on November 8th. And from here, I think we'll turn it over for comments and feedback.
So at this point, clarifying questions, just a reminder to commissioners that we're asking questions and then go back around with discussion. And I'm going to propose that we start with people in the room. So starting with Ben, we'll go geographically around the room.
Did you want to see if any?
Oh, comments from the public. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, sure. Would either care to make 2 minutes? Thanks.
Thanks. And then we'll go up to the screen. So clarifying questions.
Maybe the current
Go
site.
ahead.
Yeah,
I don't believe we have any
No, we don't.
attending on Skype, so everyone.
Okay, good. Wow. So we're asking clarifying questions at this point.
Is the, are the seating elements of the polished rock and the unpolished, or the treatment of the surface, is that a budget constraint, or is it intentional for not really trying to welcome people to sit on?
I think both. I think both. It is, you know, Joey can speak more to budget, but I do think that is a concern. But it is also, from a design standpoint of concentrating where people can sit and where it's comfortable, I think we want to use it strategically in that way.
think that's it for me. I have any other questions?
I had also an interesting question on the seating. I was just, I was interested in that. Could you go back to that slide where you have the polished top of the stone? I thought that was interesting. I just wanted to see that one more time. And so are you actually cutting it and then honing it?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be one saw cut
Yeah.
along the top, just to.
And then it
level
gets
off,
polished
and
and
it's
smooth.
polished, and then the edges would be just slightly eased so that there's no sharp.
And then
corners.
can you go back to the plan and just show me where those are located on the plan
Yep.
versus the non-worked?
Oh, yeah. It would be the ones, at the intersection. I should have created that distinction on this plan here, but these are showing where all boulders are. I think the seating ones would be at the intersection of Western and Bell, and then a couple, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but where we have the little pull-off zones along the sidewalk, there might be one or two on each block as people are ascending steep slope to be able to pull off and.
Okay.
Yeah.
And another question on the sign bridge, do you have details of how the sign bridge is connected or touches the sidewalk? Is it on a plinth, something, I'm just curious if that's been
We're
looked at
still
yet.
refining that, but
Okay.
what we're trying to do is minimize how it expresses itself at the sidewalk surface to preserve sidewalk space
Yeah.
around the base of it, because it's rather large.
Right.
But it needs to also have accessibility to the bolts and things like that. So
Yeah.
we're trying
just
to
curious.
minimize how it, like I said, expresses itself at the surface.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Great. My question is very similar about seating. I was curious I appreciated seeing, okay, not a comment. My question is, did you consider the activation of frontages in the way that you place seating along the two blocks?
That's an interesting question. I think I'm gonna say just quickly, the fastest response, not exactly. I think our focus has more been on providing people with moments to be able to pull off the sidewalk as they're going up and treating it as a consistent treatment all the way between the two blocks, but not necessarily taking too much into consideration when it comes to like what frontage program is happening immediately across from it. More so along like where does it feel needed in terms of as people are ascending the slope and along the path, as opposed to what moment is it interacting with something on the other side of the sidewalk. But it's something that, it's a good question, something that we should take a look at.
Good, thank you. That's it for me in terms of questions.
You mentioned lighting being something that the community was really interested in. What other elements of community input have you taken into account in this phase of design?
I would say these, to the point we were just talking about, is the seating locations and being able to have pull-off zones. That was a specific request from the community. There was feedback about providing kind of like areas of pause and respite for people that are having, people that may have mobility issues going up the steep slope, just being able to pause for a moment and catch their breath. So the placement of the boulders and the seating elements is in response to that. And also just providing just open hardscape space that's out of the way of traffic flow for people to be able to pull off. Let's see what other.
Support for the protected bike lane.
Yes.
It's a big part too.
Protected bike lane. The sign bridge lighting.
Many of the comments we received were about, and through survey, were about adding, focusing more on pedestrians and bicyclists. And so the PBL is really one of the main things that responds to the comments. Or responds.
And you said something about attracting people to the neighborhood. Did that come from the community as well? I think it did.
Yeah.
What elements are you presenting that you feel are in that category?
I think when you think about coming from the waterfront and like Pier 66, that pedestrian bridge, and you come across, one thing is, there's a couple things. Just the notion of widening the pedestrian zone by getting rid of that parallel parking is one thing that I think acts more welcoming and is a visual cue of this space is more for people than it is for cars, and it's something that is more of a pedestrian focused zone. that invites you in. Other thing is visual cues, like the boulders will come down and there will be a couple right at that intersection for you to see. And then you may see them and then see that they continue up. So that's something that would be drawing folks. Our logic behind putting boulders all the way down at that intersection, making that visual connection across.
The sign bridge, yeah, the sign bridge, that was the thing.
Yeah.
Gateway is the term that many people in the community used at our council, or at our, at Belltown Community Council meetings. And they view this sign bridge as like the gates to Disneyland. They want people coming up from Bell Harbor Bridge to just walk up and see the elements of the boulders and then just see this sign bridge framing, kind of drawing people in. So that was.
And the sign bridge is visible from the lowest point?
Yeah.
That you're drawing people from?
Yeah. Once they come across the Bell Harbor Bridge and get to Elliott Avenue, you'll even be able to see the sign bridge coming across the Bell Harbor Bridge, as long as there's not like a sign or something in your way. But yeah, the sign bridge is very robust. So
It's very large.
it is very large. So it'll be seen. The sign bridge is going to be about 25 feet tall and 50 feet wide, 49.
45 or something.
45, yeah, so it's a very large structure, so it'll be a beacon. And that was the desire from the very beginning, is to have this thing be a beacon from, if you were able to walk from Pike Place Market going north or anywhere, they just want this visual cue of come here.
And seating, sorry. I do wonder about ADA and seating. Have you run it through some kind of evaluation there?
Yeah, I think if we provide anything that is technically called a seat, we do need to be careful about making sure that it's level. We are limited to the slopes on the street, which are not ADA compliant, the existing slopes. So we do have to be strategic about what's considered a seat versus not a seat. So it's something we've been talking about and working through.
So these boulders are not seats?
I think a couple of them can be technically.
Are the ones near?
But the majority of
Go
them,
ahead.
yeah, the majority of them, I don't know that we can call them.
The majority of them will be sittable.
Landscape
They aren't
elements that are sittable, yeah.
Are the ones near the base of the sign bridge potentially seats?
Can you speak to the slopes there? I believe
Well, I
they're,
think that's part of the study that will go into choosing which ones will be finished that way to really call themselves as seats versus the ones that are just more natural boulders. So I think that's something we're aware of and we're looking at, but we have to understand that not only can be something to sit on level, but around it for companion accessibility and all that type of thing.
Yeah.
We have a lot more room around that area down by the sign bridge, so that's a good location, but we are dealing with a pretty
Yeah.
steep grade there.
yeah, I think the trickiest spots come in to the mid-block, little pull-off zones. I think that's where we're more limited on being able to call them seats.
And everything we're seeing now will be seen again on November 8th by the community.
Yes.
So, and there's still time for you to take into account their responses to these seats, non-seats, et cetera. Great. Jen?
Can you describe the approach to stormwater management and what the requirements are and what? I saw the ravine in the documents that were distributed for the meeting. And I assumed that was a stormwater management facility, but it doesn't look like it.
Not just directly, I mean, we're tying into the existing system that's there. We haven't found the need to improve the system necessarily. We're adding more pervious surface out there, we're reducing impervious. So, but we're not actively using the planters as detention or anything like that, if that's what you're asking.
I was thinking more about water quality, and I don't know if this goes to a combined sewer or if it goes to a dedicated storm.
I know there's a transition point around here. I'd have to check that. But I know we did look through and see if there is a need for us to do any interventions like for that. But I know we're adjusting a couple inlet locations because we're moving that curve out. But other than that, we're tying into the existing system.
But the amount of new and replaced impervious surface should trigger stormwater requirements that the city has.
Removing Impervious surface?
Replacing.
Well, I know our stormwater lead has looked at it and we're not adding impervious surfaces.
Yeah, when you look at this, it can be a little misleading. So we're not, the roadway looks like it's being replaced. We're not touching into the roadway paving. We're just bumping out a sidewalk on the parking lane on block 1 and replacing some sidewalk.
Adding some medium buffers.
Adding some medium buffers. We're pretty much just putting the medium buffers right on the existing road. So we're not really changing much. I don't think we don't trigger anything that would require any stormwater code.
Okay. So the fact that these are, they have some slope to them, the roadways have some slope to them, and especially in block 1 where you have that additional landscape buffer to work with, it seems like if you're going to if the existing system you're discharging to is a dedicated storm, then providing water quality treatment in the form of bioretention planters there seems like kind of a no-brainer. It's perfect for, you've got the slope to put in some tiered planters, and you could even drain the block 2 runoff from the roadway to the block 1 planters. So I think I commented on that in the first presentation, and I think it's worth considering if it goes to a dedicated storm. If it goes to a combined sewer, that's a different issue, but it seems like a responsible thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did have that thought in very early concept of could we mimic something that's on, what's the one just north? Vine Street. So Vine Street has something similar.
Yeah.
In talking with SPU and others, it didn't seem like we had enough of an area. It didn't seem like we had enough. We don't have enough budget for it is one of the big things. But the other thing is we weren't affecting the roadway enough, or we're not changing the grading of the roadway. So directing things to flow through the median or whatnot, it just didn't seem to work out. But it's something that we can know, and we can talk with Jesse afterwards. And but it's something definitely to know. I appreciate the comment.
Did any of your recent budget increases, which I'm sure you're pleased about, because it's unusual to get, I mean, you went from 3.6 to 5.2, I think.
Correct.
Is that any of that programmed into some of the issues that I think that Pooja is questioning you about, or is it dedicated to other solutions based on the color of the line?
So right now, the budget is, we increased the budget because we have introducing the PBL. Conceptually, it's an easy thing to do to put it on 2D. And so when the initial budget was 3.2, and that initial budget was decided years and years and years and years ago. So once it really came out of like, okay, we need to do these treatments and we need to make things ADA, and we're redoing some curb ramps more so. So we've had expanded scope.
Sure.
And so it's really geared towards that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's geared towards that.
Okay.
But I do like the comp.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you, so Phoebe.
I was gonna ask about planting.
Can you speak up a little, Phoebe?
Planting, I was just gonna ask about planting.
Thank you.
And I was curious about, we saw this previously too, and understand kind of the incisive tactics for where you have planted. So my question was about the meadow extension. How much area do you really have there to reflect that kind of big meadow that you're trying to
Yeah, that's a good question.
bring in?
It's not very big. But given its proximity, it's like just on the other side of the sidewalk. It felt like the right thing to do, plant mix wise. If you have a small little area of hardscape there and a couple boulders, it felt right to be framed by the same planting that you were looking at down that new alleyway corridor. But I hear I echo your sentiments. Yeah.
I think it's a nice idea, just make sure that there's enough
Yeah.
room to make that happen,
Yeah.
so that you'll set a moment. Yeah. And then the other question I had, don't have any more. That was really the primary one. And the other one is about, I think in previous presentations, you talked about Market to Mohai, and how this contributed or connected in, or, what our question is just like, what's the effect on that?
So the majority of the Market to Mohai signage is on the existing pedestrian streetlights, which we're all maintaining. So the idea is to maintain all that as much as possible. And there's one streetlight that will be relocated, or pedestrian light that will be shifted. So we'll make sure to hopefully keep any sort of signage that is on that, to make sure that we're not affecting the Market to Mohai, signage in any way. And there are a couple where we are doing sidewalk improvements. There are a couple painted panels on the sidewalk for the Market to Mohai that I think the team maybe needs to discuss between now and our next milestone is trying to maintain those things to make sure that we're not just getting rid of them, but we're keeping them or adding to them.
And I believe Guy with Burger is redoing and leading the charge for Market to Mohai and signage. So I believe, don't quote me on it, I believe there's new signage or things kind of in the works. And so whatever we pick out, I believe there's gonna be new stuff back in around, not just on Bell Street.
So there's that synergy there.
Yeah, I believe it's in works.
My first question is for the Block 2 block. For the areas where you were explaining that we didn't really have the space to expand micro areas, we're going to install those cobbles. Was it ever considered to install green space pavers, more open pavers that would allow some greenery, but is still a relatively hardscape surface?
That's an interesting question. It's not something that we considered thoroughly. I think we probably wrote it off early on just because of the realities of urban traffic and the ability for anything to survive in small little tiny pockets of planting. It's just not something that does well in an urban condition with the amount of traffic that we deal with. So I don't think it's something that we would want to consider at this point. Yeah, does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, I was partially asking from a standpoint of would this create an opportunity for additional greenery, as well as would that allow for even less impervious surface to potentially be installed? Because I mean, cobbles are going to be and would it be a little bit more accessible for users? As I know some find the cobbles to be even difficult to navigate. So is there a solution here that potentially could have greenery, could potentially reduce impervious surfaces, or improve some of that treatment option, and might be a little bit more friendly to walk or roll on than cobbles?
To the point about the impervious surface, that has been a big topic of discussion as we talked about the cobbles. The initial intent with the cobblestone was to use pervious jointing between them to improve, reduce the amount of impervious surface that's around the tree roots and improve the water and air exchange down to the tree roots. The challenge with that, as we've talked with urban forestry, our top priority is to preserve the existing trees. And when we introduce a system or an assembly that allows for infiltration between the joints and down into a pervious sub-base, it requires a very deep assembly. So then we are actually getting into the root zones and compromising the existing trees. So on one hand, we're kind of going against the goal of improving the health of the trees, because while we want to provide impervious surface for the tree roots to benefit them, well, the assembly doesn't actually allow us to have a light touch on the tree roots, and so we'd actually be compromising the trees. So just to give you a little bit more detail about the considerations of impervious versus pervious and improving the health of the trees and the green space along there. But that is an interesting comment, and we will take it into consideration in terms of any sort of like grass paved type products that might be an option. But yeah,
And to extend off that, my second question also extends to Commissioner Shaw's point of, or question of, the opportunities for stormwater maintenance here. And, I understand there's certain requirements for stormwater and those have been evaluated, but has it kind of been looked at from a standpoint of this is a little bit more of a bike and pedestrian focused region? And, I think the inlets down on Elliott Bay are very close to the curb ramps and the curb bulb out for where the cycle track is. Has it been looked at from a standpoint of, are we gonna see a bunch of leaves collecting at those inlets? Are we gonna be seeing water pooling in front of the curb ramps? Or if those inlets do get clogged by the tree leaves falling, it's what happens right now. And I certainly experienced it on my bike ride in today. Has that been considered in terms of, do we need to move, at least moving the inlets? Or seeing how that runoff might be collecting at those very, very key moments for those pedestrians and cyclists.
I know we've looked at the inlet location in regards to like low spots that you would have at curb bulbs and avoided that. So we've put them in position to be successful that way. As far as like leaf intrusion and that type of thing, I think with the slope that we have, it's maybe helpful to have some scouring almost from the water that comes through there. So I know that we don't want to have any ramps that are going to have water on them, and we make sure we grade to make sure that that doesn't happen. So
yeah, or considering, would we ever move in inlet? I think the inlet at Elliott Bay is in front of the curb ramp.
At Elliott Bay, sorry.
At Elliott Avenue.
Oh, at Elliott Avenue.
It's in the wing of the curb ramp today.
The one on the south side is but the road flows is super to the north.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's an inlet that's sort of at where the pink box is on the north side of Block 1. But the road is super that way. So I think the one that's in the wing won't be clogged. I don't think there's any existing issues out there because the road is so steep.
For a fifth roadway, I'm a little concerned.
Well, and grading and drainage is very much considered in how we're laying out the three-dimensional aspect of it, the sloping and the warping, things like that around the curb ramps. So that's always something we keep an eye on.
And then, from the standpoint of this presentation, we'll be discussing a little bit more the roadway elements and conflict points as well, or
Like traffic conflict points?
yes, between pedestrians, bicyclists, and stuff like that.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
You want to jump into that?
Want to do that now?
Well, I was just curious if that's going to be another part of.
Are we out of comments, any questions?
Not yet.
No, we've moved through with questions, so if you have any additional clarifying questions,
Okay.
particularly about those topics, it's great to ask those now, and
Sure.
then we'll circle back through.
So yeah,
with
we
the comments period.
we have these slides, which we kind of kept in the back pocket because they're a lot to look at. So apologize for that.
No, this is exactly what I want to know.
Okay.
I'm a transportation engineer.
Okay, there you go.
Exactly,
So,
yes.
yeah, this isn't for everybody.
Alleyways, yes.
Yeah, so and that goes into how the the median geometry is set up. And one of the reasons why we saw some benefits of shifting the protected bike lane to the north side of the street versus the south. And so when we had the top one, just to orient people, we're all looking at just this one block, which is block 1 between Elliott and Western. Block 2 is somewhat similar, but so I thought it'd be helpful just to illustrate it here on block 1. But the top one is the concept where we have the south side protected bike lane, and the little pink circles are representing conflict points. And the image below is the north side protected bike lane. And so that was some of the thinking that went into kind of sorting out some of those conflict areas. So if we look at the top, where we had it on the south side, southbound cyclists would need to cross any vehicle that would be taking a left turn onto one-way eastbound belt. So that was a conflict that would happen. The other conflicts that we have are alley related or driveway related, so a lot less frequent. The ones on the north side on the bottom image there are both for the apartment building there to the left, and then in the alleyway to the right there. And those are a bit more controlled and less frequent and smaller vehicles versus roadway traffic. Also the alley which is on the right side, the bottom of each of the graphics, that one accesses what's called the Point Building. It's a big wedge-shaped building itself. And so that is improved by not having the bike lane on the south. The other thing is when we go off to the next block, we have to kind of imagine here, we're planning to tie into a cross bike that goes across First Avenue and improvements onto Bell Street to the east that are on the north side of the street. So it matches better with that. So this was kind of a discussion to talk about why, when people would ask, well, why did you move the protected bike lane from the south to the north? And this was kind of talking about that, but it also illustrates some of the vehicle and bike conflicts that we were addressing. Pedestrian conflicts aren't really shown here, but they're pretty well managed by standard crosswalk design. Red lights and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of alleys and driveways along this block. They're not, I wouldn't say they have a high volume of traffic, but there are residences and a need for access to those. Does that help?
Yes.
Wonderful. Unless, Jay, you have any additional clarifying questions, we can also circle back to this topic during the discussion.
Sure.
So we're going to go ahead and go into the commissioner discussion section. Commissioners, just a reminder of a few of the things that we can discuss during this, including some of the topics you all have already brought up. The design overall, its ability to achieve the goals of the project, circulation, including the bike, pedestrian, vehicular circulation, gathering, linger, and view spaces, equity, sustainability, integration into the waterfront project and neighborhood, the budget, and then please remember to include materials, furnishing, and plant selections, because we may not be seeing this project at 90% design, so we want to incorporate that thinking into this conversation. Things I've already heard about that I'd love to hear your comments on following your questions are seating, the base of the signage has been brought up, welcoming and drawing people in, stormwater conversations, the plantings, as well as some of the signage considerations. And at that, I'll pass it down for the discussion period.
I thank you for the presentation and the thoroughness of the design. From my perspective, I think that it's a really comprehensive. I think it solves a lot of the issues, and I don't think that I have many. There's, I guess, one question. Could you go back to? I believe that the rock seating or the rock seating is tied back to the ravine, correct? Yeah. And then the signage element is an Art Deco. It's like part of the old structure, right? Mm-hmm. So very cool. I guess I was just curious if there was ever any consideration of making the seating kind of an Art Deco vibe, or if I like the rocks too. They seem like a little. You'd have to have a presentation to understand kind of where they came from. Yeah. It's a little bit of a disconnect for me in an urban environment. And I don't think it's necessarily bad or anything. I just, and maybe that is a question, I guess. Did you ever consider the kind of tying it in with the signage?
Yeah, I don't know that we considered tying it so closely with the sign bridge in an Art Deco way. I think purely because of just trying to let the sign bridge be its own thing and not trying to create something new that rips off of it. I think just the design sense that we've had up until this point is treating it as something that's kind of pure and its own thing, if that makes sense. The idea with the boulders is a big part of it is, so there's the inspiration from the ravine and a way, there's a logic there to express that story and tell that story. But there's also a functionality aspect of having something that's really hefty and robust and something that's gonna hold up really well.
Zero
to-
maintenance. all
Yeah,
that kind of
people,
stuff.
you know, yeah, tampering with it, or, you know, it's something that just wears down over time or weathers, like it's gonna be there
Right.
and be solid and be good for a long time in the urban condition, so, but it's a good question about, you know, does it tie to the story of the Sign Bridge, and, good thing to
I
think
don't know
about,
that it
yeah,
needs to, it was a thought, and I don't know
yeah.
if we discussed it last time or not. In my head, I thought we did, but it's not even a direction, it was just a question,
Thought I'd mention-
or a conversation, what's that?
You brought up something I thought I'd expand on a little bit, which is feedback that we heard from the community was also about this idea of robustness, and that they were feeling that some of the improvements that were done to the east weren't holding up as well as they'd like them to. So we heard a lot about doing something that's gonna not only look good on day one, but to last and be maintained.
The other thing that I heard in your presentation is I think you'd said the proper coatings and the anti-graffitiness of the structure. And I'm always amazed at how people with spray paint cans can seemingly climb these things. So I do think that would be a concern. I would expect it to get tagged. And is that in the budget to like clean, or I
Yes.
don't know. I know those coatings
Well,
wear off over time.
I was gonna make a slight tweak on that. What we're doing is we're sandblasting it and repainting it. The idea, not putting anti-graffiti coating on it, but when you repaint something, you can have that paint on hand and cover up graffiti.
Right.
It's a lot easier than going through the whole process of graffiti removal.
Yeah.
So.
But
just a
it's-
slight little-
Yeah,
And it's inevitable that this is, I mean, it's in Belltown, it's inevitable, this
It's a
thing's gonna be
target.
tagged, it's gonna be a target, it's bound to happen. There's a very strong community member in Belltown who is the graffiti czar, and he has a person who pays to go out and will regularly just paint over things, and so there's some bit of community involvement to keep this thing painted as much as possible. And I know Rotary Structures is, SDOT's Rotary Structures is being more diligent on this. But we're fully expecting that this thing's gonna be tagged and it's gonna have to have some paint maintenance for sure.
So I appreciate that. My kind of final comment, I'm super guilty of stepping into the bike lanes and not looking either direction. So I know. And I think what ends up happening for me personally is there's not a very good, I'm like looking around or doing something or talking to somebody, and there's not a really great transition strip. So, or awareness, like it's not like a pavement change or anything. So you just kind of have to know or be paying attention, which I clearly am not all the time. So I think that's like a comment of maybe overall bike lane design across the city, just sort of that it's not always, if you're not aware and looking, then you're not always, like you're used to cars and stuff. So I don't have any further, that's just a comment. I am excited for what you guys have done between the streets. I walk up and down that street, that's my neighborhood, so I'm excited about it. Looks good.
I'll respond to a couple of, I'm very passionate about people walking across bike lanes, because I had a very bad incident on a bike with that exact same thing.
I'm sorry.
In this case, it's gonna be, I think the way that we won't have that issue on this stretch is that it's the bike lane's in the road, so pedestrians would have to step on to the curb.
Yeah.
And there's no real access. There are breaks between the medians, but there's no real reason or desire or access for pedestrians to walk across.
Yeah.
So the conflicts between bikes and pets, I think we've thought about and dealt with, and we shouldn't have too many conflicts with that.
The one that goes down the road there, that's right adjacent to the sidewalk, it's sort of down
Down
Elliott. It's like it's almost on the sidewalk, and it actually is a pavement material because it's asphalt and concrete.
Right.
There's not like there's no lip, so you just it's really easy to just kind of wander into the bike lane. So that
You're
was,
talking
and
south.
further down, that was kind of an example
In the new
of something
construction
that
of
is maybe not
Clutter,
as
yeah.
successful, but
Okay.
we should
So,
pass,
little-
I'm gonna pass on, yeah.
A little time check, we've got less than 20 minutes,
Great.
so if we can be passionate
Yep.
and succinct.
We can. I think this is a great project. I'm really excited that you've taken it this far, and I think the other commissioners, I think, can talk about the landscape design and the traffic, have more expertise than me. As an architect, and I work a lot with historic buildings, historic structures. I'm really interested in the Sign Bridge. I think it's a beautiful piece. And I like your discussion of the history of the site. But I think the sign bridge is a little bit different, and partly, and again, I'm not trying to lecture anybody, but I do kind of nerd out on architectural history. It's not Art Deco at all.
Yeah.
It's art.
I just
The
saw the
Art Deco
circles.
is from early 20th century and ends around early 1930s. This is a classic piece of mid-century modern structural engineering as architecture. And what's beautiful about it is, Art Deco is sort of applied decoration, and it was a certain aesthetic, and it's wonderful. This is the opposite. It's about the forces of the structural engineering are giving form. And so, the circles they didn't need steel there, so they cut them out.
Right.
And even when I'm looking at your drawing here, when you look at the edge, the legs splay just a little bit to get just enough moment resisting force by spreading those bolts. So I think that's the history of the site, which was the viaduct is part of the history of the site.
Yeah.
And it was designed in the 1950s. And I think this is, this beautiful piece represents that design philosophy. And so I think that's important because the history, you're going back to probably the natural pre-European contract with a reference to the natural elements. And then you're looking at late 19th century, early 20th century, what Belltown looked like. And then there's kind of a gap and that's fine. I'm just saying, it's just, we have the project's opportunity to tell the public about the history of the site. And it's super interesting.
Yeah.
And, that's it. I'm not trying to lecture, but
I
to me,
love it.
that's,
The sign bridge specifically, there's definitely divide. I mean, some people look at it
Yeah.
and see Art Deco because the holes are cut out and it was an art piece and this and that.
right.
But looking back at like the actual design, it's purely just.
It couldn't be Art Deco
structural
because it's from 30 years after
Right.
that whole
No
period.
one intended it
But
for it to be.
the point is, I think there's something interesting about the structural imperative of its design, and it brings me to comment about the lighting. And it seems like the lighting isn't designed very well yet because you're not there yet. I'm not sure, and again, I'm just throwing this out there, whether you really want to run conduit and LED lights up and around through this thing. And that kind of looks to me like there's LED lights that are being fed up and through with some kind of exposed conduit. I'm not really sure how that's really going to work. And it might be a concept, but I'm wondering if your lighting designers might look at it differently. I'm wondering if you might light it elsewhere and put light on it rather than try and thread light up and around it. I'm not sure how successful that's going to be.
It's a good point. I know that's our current direction with it, and it's something that we did think a little bit about it from lighting from external, but then the lights are exposed.
Where are they? Yeah.
They're in the ground and they can
yeah.
get water and
Yeah.
damage and vandalized and things like that. So it felt like it was an approach that at least we could control a bit more.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. This approach is sort of lighting the voids rather than the form. And I'm not sure if that's the right approach, but again, I know I'm going off into sort of an esoteric aesthetics of something.
We're
But
kind of, I would say also that there's been a lot of community input about all of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
map about what they'd like this sign bridge to be. And it's at a certain point, we've just kind of said, time out, we're gonna
right. It's
put this
great.
thing together, kind of, we're gonna sandblast it, we're gonna repaint it so
Yeah.
that it's healthy as
Yeah.
a structure.
And some
the
kind of
idea was to
yeah.
light it, and we did talk about this internally with the Office of the Waterfront about the lighting approach here. It's a lighter touch, and
That's good. I mean, I think it's great. I just think it's one of the few remnants of the viaduct, which is an important history of our city. And so often, the idea is like, oh, that let's get rid of that. That was terrible. Let's forget it ever happened. And I think you're doing something which says, hey, this is part of our history. So it's great.
I think there's an interpretive piece that's maybe a future thing that could happen here that we're not currently.
I'll pass on.
I think the design commission actually recommended that a piece of the viaduct be kept.
It's wonderful.
That was, Buster was all for that. A lot of people were for that.
It's great. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. And we're going to skip the meeting because I'll include my comments in our
I just threw it.
comment.
Thank you for all the details you've considered, and from pets to places of respite, et cetera. I'm really, speaking of history, I think your initial photograph of the bluff was really interesting, Hannah. And I'm wondering if this question of boulders, how they're treated, maybe if they can be a little more comfortable for certain ages, abilities, et cetera, how they're arranged, how they're dealt with. What they say to me is, we've got slope and we've got gravity. and there may be some way that those seating elements that are practical, maybe stormwater, I don't know. There's some way to incorporate some of these existing questions into what is essentially gravitational pull downhill. So it's just a suggestion for some ways to maybe pull these things together.
Yeah.
And I think pausing and catching one's breath, it'll be very interesting to see what the community says when they look at these. And I think that question of pausing, catching one's breath, which was a desire to figure out how that really can happen with what's a kind of a hard-edged object, that probably needs a little more brainstorming.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Pooja.
Yeah, I think it's a super thoughtful design, and I was curious enough about the stormwater question that I looked up the drainage maps, and now I know why your thoughtful design did not incorporate water quality treatment, because it does go to a combined sewer.
I
So
was thinking so.
that makes sense. So yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that.
Thank
I thought I would just comment, and I'll try not to repeat any comments about the rock wash. But what I do appreciate about that is one of our comments before was, I think the seating element is a constant question of where they go. I think there's good commentary about do they correlate with facades and entries. I think the most important is that you've highlighted the intersection, right? That is like the the utmost importance. And then where it continues, I think that can continue to be refined. But I think the rock wash is a clever way of being able to afford, continuity in the design, but allowing for kind of those moments and episodic moments of seating. So I really appreciate that. And I think that just continuing with that refinement and making sure it really works is important. And I also appreciate the cobbles in that. I think actually, just getting to emphasize that we do think that the exclusion of planting on block 2, I think, is really successful, and allowing that kind of expanded streetscape and making that feel more generous and gracious on that north facade, I think is actually the better approach to allow that sidewalk to feel larger. So I kind of like that kind of expanded notion of walking space and older space and seating. So just continuing to refine that is great. And then I'll just go to the planting comment. I would thank you, Pooja, for looking up the bioretention, because that would also affect that comment for the meadow, but I just would continue to say about that meadow extension. And I know it's just this tiny thing, but I love meadows, and they're, and I know how beautiful and successful that is. So just being able to think about that relationship with what you're doing in the rest of the design in that corner, and what the most successful, I would just say the most successful planting strategy in that corner should win.
Yeah.
Whether it's meadow or not.
Yeah.
I think that's it for me.
I'll reflect similarly that, there's been a lot of thought put into this project, and it's good to see the balance of efficiency and safety for all of the users, as well as just enjoyment of the public space. And I think that's really been reflected in working here. Going back similarly to the sign structure, I think my perspective might differ a little bit in that I like the internalized lighting of the sign structure, partially from a standpoint of perhaps there's opportunity to have that sign structure help illuminate the crosswalk underneath it. And I worry a little bit about lighting aimed towards the structure, backlighting pedestrians, or being not as enjoyable for the pedestrian experience, or perhaps not having as good of lighting for that pedestrian crossing. But I'm excited to see that sign structure come in so closely to where it went into where this used to dive into Battery Street Tunnel, and really changing that shift. To me, it really exemplifies the shift from that vehicle focus along the waterfront to now, we're kind of taking this historical moment from the viaduct and showing how much it is now surrounding all users of the roadway, bicyclists, pedestrians, and drivers. So I think it's a really cool project.
Thank you very much for this this update and all the thoughtful details. Do you have questions for us? Based on what, what's still lingering in your minds, what we've asked, things that,
None for me. I mean, the team's been great. Andrew's, a veteran at the SDC, and Hannah and I are both newbies to the project. So I just appreciate both of them working so hard. It's a tiny little project, just 2 small blocks, but it has a very passionate community behind it, and I think we're doing a good job delivering for them and getting it done. So
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't have any questions.
I think there's still some curiosity about how, in this group about how the neighborhood responds to this and
Yeah.
where you go next. And I appreciate you actually giving us some fodder to keep thinking along with you.
I have one really quick question. When would this be built and completed, or when do you expect it to be built and completed? I'm sorry, I didn't ask that earlier.
tentatively, summer of next year, early summer of next year, we'll start construction. And 6 to 8 month construction, so mid to late next year it should be built. Great, of course, tentative.
All right, and is there anything that you all wanted to clarify that you feel that we didn't fully understand or speak about in a way that reflects your understanding?
I think so.
Okay, well, fabulous. At that, we're going to take our action. So we want to thank your team for your presentation on Bell Street. We're excited to see the continued development since the last time we saw this project. This was our second review of the project. And unless I hear any commissioners share otherwise as we go around, we do not anticipate seeing the project at 90% design. But if anyone feels that there's any follow-up that's necessary from the team, once I go through what we have heard, please feel free to let us know if there's anything that you want follow up via email about, or if there's anything you would want to see in subcommittee. So what we heard, so the commissioners really appreciated the overarching goals of the project and always have, as well as the continued development. I know that you all have had team changes, and it's exciting to see the ways that you've continued to move this project forward with the initial goals of the project. So thank you for that. We were excited to see that the bike lane did shift to the north, and that helped avoid some of the conflicts that we saw last time. We also appreciated the way that the design language connected to Bell Street to the east, to the rest of that corridor, and the way that you had a distinct design language developing for your treatment of the gateway, as well as for your treatment of the boulders as they move throughout, as well as the further development of your paving thinking and how that relates to your plant palette as well. We also, speaking of the gateway structure, we also liked the way that you are lighting the gateway structure and the way that that reflects the community desires. There was a mixed set of opinions about whether that lighting is ideally internal to the structure or if it's cast on the structure. I can personally say as well that I liked the internal for it not casting light into the sky, but similarly to Matt, I want to see that it be celebratory and really treat the structure as a celebratory piece of architectural history. So I saw mixed methods, but a desire across the commission to see that architectural expression be celebrated. We also, I heard that commissioners liked the potential of the rock seating elements and are interested in we'll discuss some of the further development of that in recommendations. And I also heard that there was appreciation for the expansion of pedestrian space and the focus on pedestrian space, even as it required exclusion of plantings on that second block. I did hear the following recommendations. So I heard that the recommendation that you continue to consider the lighting approach on the gateway structure as a key component and further that development with that goal in mind. For the seating, I would recommend the consideration of the activation of frontages and how that influences where you do want to have seating. We appreciated seeing the concentration near the gateway, in particular the way that reflects the view locations in the area. But as those move outward, I would hope to see some consideration of how active frontages might make people feel safer or less safe in various areas. But appreciate the thinking for that hill climb as well. I would also encourage you to think about what seating is available from an ADA perspective, true seating, as you move beyond that block in both directions. So thinking of it as a part of that broader walking experience beyond your project. And then for the plantings, I heard the desire that you continue to develop the thinking for the most successful planting strategy, whether or not that ends up being meadow planting, though there was appreciation for meadow planting. That's all that I have, unless anyone had any additional recommendations or things that they wanted to hear from the team following.
I do think it's worth, commissioners, I do think it's worth not necessarily reporting back, but making sure that you true up the Mohi to market work and how you're creating what you're creating here, because having experienced market to Mohi and you're climbing up that hill, if you're creating these pause areas, that might be a great place to true the two up. So getting together with Berger, looking at planned and existing, and how that trues up with your moves here.
And to that, I think we would also encourage something that you described, which was the considerations for some of those market to Mohi pieces and how they're attained.
And I'm gonna add, looking at the boulders, both as functional objects and also groupings that help support the whole story that you're telling about this space, and really using those in every way possible, metaphorically and actually.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. At that, we'll go in the same order, starting to my right and moving around the room. Please state yes or no to approve, and let us know if you're voting no. Please state why.
I approve, yes.
I approve.
I approve.
I approve.
As do I.
All right, fabulous. So that is all votes for, no votes against. And thank you all for your presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for, especially given the change in the team. I'm sure it was a pause for. I don't know.
Bit of catching up.
And the city team and the GGN team. So thank you for the hard work.
Yeah, the change, neither of us.
No.
think that's
It appears seamless.
I mean, it's like.
The presentation.
Oh, good.
But yeah,
We
exactly.
liked the team all along.
I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the recording and we may be done for the day.
We're just gonna make one announcement though, that the commissioner, I think I mentioned this during business one time, but the commission is going to co-host with the new Indigenous Advisory Council an event, a speaking event on November 7th at 4 p.m. A Maori architect from Auckland is gonna present work on how Indigenous design informed the light rail station designs.
Oh, wow.
Although she just told me it's actually rail, but so transit stations in Auckland.
October 7th or November 7th?
November 7th at 4 p.m. here in City Hall. And we have, so the Indigenous Advisory Council is co-hosting, and Council President Deborah Juarez is co-hosting this now too. So 3 tickets for 7.
And we'll get a invite.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, we're trying to get this out.
Great. Thank you.
So it's a lot, like, it's an in-person event, and we do expect a lot of